Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Amen. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Om Agyanatimirandhasya ज्ञानञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे। श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे।
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Okay, welcome everybody to 7 Habits of, that's getting louder, Successful Spiritualists. And we are here in the presence of His Holiness Keshava Swami Maharaj Ki. It's his first and hopefully not last visit here to the farm. So this topic, I feel like we're all in very, very capable hands, seeing Maharaj's growth and, well, my obsession, I can say, with hitting the refresh button on the Wisdom That Breathes channel or the Keshava Swami channel on YouTube and binge watching them at work. I'm seeing people nodding, so I'm not alone in that. So I think a lot of us are familiar with Maharaj here, but at 21 years old, he did become a monk, and here over 22 decades, that's better. 22 decades, past lives, I don't know. 2 decades later, he's still going. Many books he's written, which we'll see at the back here, or you can have a look at. I won't take up too much time. This is more housekeeping for this program. We'll be running till 3 o'clock with a break. This first section will be running until 11:30, and in which time we'll be heading over to the where Prasadam will be. So if we all head out and down this dirt path, hit a left or this way and turn right. Essentially in this direction, we have lunch provided for us, which is really wonderful. Some ecstatic, multinational, famous Bhakti burgers. We've got soup and so, anyway, too early for Prasadam conversation. But it's down there. At the back of the hall, we have a hydration station. So, not my words, that's literally what it's called. So there's cups there, please take one, please write your name on it so we're not just in such a disposable culture, and just hold on to that and keep refilling. There's snacks, so don't fade away. Keep nice and strong energy, focused for Maharaj's class. And so the picnic lunch will be at 11:30, coming back for 1:30, where we'll then have a series of question and answers. So we're requesting all of you, please, during this first part of the program, if you've got questions, jotting them down on a piece of paper, and we have a bowl, a bucket, a receptacle of some description where we'll collect the questions, and then Maharaj will be able to discern his way through the questions and then go through it after lunch. Bathrooms are also, as we're going down this pathway, turning right, there is a section of men's and women's, you'll see, and then at a pinch, if you go towards the prasadam hall down there on the left, there is also bathrooms there. I think I've about covered it. Books, please have a look. Maharaj has got a selection of books down here. Julan will be there minding the book table. Fill in the blanks from there, and I think that's about it. We'll begin, if that's all right with you, Maharaj. Okay, Hare Krishna, please everyone welcome His Holiness Keshava Swami.
All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be with you today and discuss the 7 habits of successful spiritualists. These are not any particular kind of things that are necessarily stressed by any of the scriptures, but they're all principles which are contained within our tradition. And the reason I've picked these 7 is because I've felt that in my life these 7 things have really helped me, and I always like to try to share with things with people that I feel like I've experienced and to some extent observed the transformational power of in my life. So hopefully some of these will be beneficial for you. And I will leave time, even in this session, for some questions and answers, and would love all of you to participate and kind of share your ideas, and let's kind of see where we go. So let me just begin by asking you to do... Oh, this is not on. Ek minute. Okay, sure. No worries. So maybe I'll just say a little bit about, these are habits that I think I very much learned in my monastic life. So I was very fortunate for 20 years of my life to be living in London at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Many of you know this kind of iconic monastery, temple, spiritual community. And I felt like, I learned so many things there. And of course, not most people who join the monastery as monks don't live as monks for their whole life. We have men, we have ladies, they spend 6 months, 1 year, sometimes a few years, and then they make a transition into the real world, if you want to call it that. But they carry many of the habits and the lifestyles that they learn. And therefore I often share with people about the monk mindset, that it's really beneficial taking some time. Yesterday we were talking about disconnection, taking some time away to actually develop that kind of inner mindset and spiritual foundation. So, okay, we're still waiting for... Yeah, no worries. So in the Eastern tradition, if someone would live for 100 years, then they would generally split up their life into 4 stages. The 4 stages are known as brahmacharya, which means student life, grihastha, which means householder life, vanaprastha, which means retired life, and then sannyas, which means a life of complete spiritual absorption. And sometimes I tell people brahmacharya means to learn, grihastha means to earn, vanaprastha means to turn, and sannyas means to burn, kind of, to extinguish all your material desires for sure, but perhaps more to return to your original spiritual nature. And therefore it's very, very scientific And the idea is that the first 25 years of life are very much a preparation, a foundational kind of time. And even if someone doesn't spend 25 years of their life learning this kind of spiritual foundation, it's something that you can still incorporate wherever you are. So let's have a look. I'm just going to show you something on the screen, and I just want you to tell me, or just count. I'm going to show it to you for about 20 seconds. I just want you to count how many times you see the letter F. Yeah? So you're going to find the letter F. All right. Ready? Okay, go for it. Simple enough for a morning exercise. If you saw the letter F 2 times and 2 times only, say 2. Thank you, I'm very relieved. If you saw the letter F 3 times and 3 times only, say 3. Okay. If you saw the letter F 4 times and 4 times only, say 4. If you saw the letter F 5 times, say 5. It's a very confident 5 there. If you saw it 6 times, say 6. If you saw it 7 times, say 7. If you saw it 8 times, say 8. Okay. Interesting, isn't it? A simple exercise, and we all see very, very different things. Psychologists tell us that most people miss these. There's something wired in our brain, in most people's brains, whereby they can't detect an F when it's next to an O. Interesting, isn't it? So this opens up a can of worms. Because what this proves to us is that it's quite possible that there are many, many things in life which are blatantly obvious right in front of us, real, tangible, but that we completely miss. And perhaps that's the story of life, that they say we don't see the world as it is, but we see the world as we are. And therefore, taking time to upgrade our vision, taking time to actually see the unseen, hear the unheard, that is a very, very powerful principle. So often I share with people that we all live in 5 worlds. The first world is the world around us. That's the land we live in, this world consisting of continents, countries, cities, this world of 7 billion people. The second world we live in is the world which we choose. That's the place, the people, the worldview which we espouse, and the immediate environment which we make choices to be surrounded by. Then they say the other world that we live in, the world inside of us, that's the world that nobody sees. They say sometimes smiling faces but crying hearts. And therefore there's also a world inside of us that we're very much being affected by every single day. And then there's a part of the world that we want to change. There's a part of the world that we'd like to in some way contribute to. And then the final world is the world that we're creating, because every single day we're making decisions, and every single day we're pursuing desires, and according to our choices, we design our destiny, and therefore there's a world, a future world that we're creating. Which of these worlds do you think you have most influence over? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? 3, 4, 2, 5. It's interesting. You're all right in one sense. But oftentimes what happens is we definitely have influence over all of these worlds, but it begins somewhere. What spiritual traditions will tell us is that the world we choose is the world that we have the most control over. Because you can't always immediately change the world inside of you. When you're angry, can you just change it in a moment? When you feel envious of someone, can you just delete that emotion? It's very difficult. But what we can do is we can tangibly choose the world that we want to live in. We can't really affect the world around us necessarily, but we can choose the world we want to live in. And according to that world that we choose, it then determines our inner consciousness, our inner world. And then the quality of our inner go back into the world and make a change, make a contribution, make a transformation in the world. And according to all of that, we design our destiny. And therefore, perhaps, one of the first problems that many of us may have in our life is we focus on all the worlds except the world that we have the most influence over. How much of our life do we focus on what's going on out there? How much of our life are we always kind of drowned by our emotions and overcome by certain things inside of us that we feel powerless to change? How much are we frustrated about something happening that we really want to change but we can't? And how much are we dreaming about the future? So oftentimes what happens is we spend a lot of time focusing our time and energy in worlds that definitely affect us, but that we may not have that much control over. And so the idea is that when we understand what kind of world should I choose for myself, what habits, lifestyles, what behaviors, what patterns of living should I incorporate that will maximize my life, that's a more progressive way to kind of live our life. So today I'm just going to share with you 7 things that have helped me in my journey, and perhaps some of them will trigger something for all of you. The first thing that I never thought I would do in my life, but which became such a huge part of my life, was writing, and specifically journaling. When I was a young monk, one of the mentors, he told me, why don't you start writing a journal? And I was kind of like, that's what teenage kids do when they have a crush on someone. They'll write a journal. And he said, no, it's a great way to become more aware of your inner dialogue. He said, we are in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We're in the business of transforming consciousness. And therefore, what is the ways and means by which you're observing and exploring your own consciousness? He said to me, people write, and often they think writing is just a way to express your thoughts. But writing is also a very, very powerful way to discover your thoughts. And so we find in the lineages of great teachers that many of them wrote diaries. They became very thoughtful. They became very, very introspective. And this is very, very important because social science tells us that between the age of 0 and 25, age and wisdom has a direct correlation. In other words, an 18-year-old is almost always wiser than a 12-year-old, because when we're between the ages of 0 and 25, then what happens is we learn through an educational system. The fascinating thing is that social scientists tell us that between the ages of 25 and 75, there's very little and sometimes no correlation between age and wisdom. In other words, it's not that a 70-year-old is wiser than a 30-year-old, because after 25, we're not in an educational system anymore. We're not in a structured way of learning. So how do you think people learn between the age of 25 and 75? Experience. But a 70-year-old has more experiences than a 30-year-old. So is it just experience? Specifically, it's experience that's reflected upon. In other words, the most reflective, the most introspective, the most thoughtful people who take the time to observe life, ask questions, they're the ones that actually become the wisest. And so we perhaps live in a world today in which people are not really thinking that much. We've become very, very lazy in the kind of art of thinking. Sometimes people ask me, but isn't journaling and all of that, isn't that kind of like overthinking? Don't we just need to kind of get on with life and not spend too much time in our head? If I asked you, what's the difference between overthinking and introspection? Have any ideas for me? How can you tell the difference between overthinking and genuine introspection which benefits you in your life? Yes?
I think introspection would be analyzing more your thoughts, and overthinking would be analyzing the environment around you.
Okay, so overthinking is about that which is out of your control. But introspection is dealing with the inner world, or that which is within our circle of influence. Thank you. Yes?
I think overthinking makes you more stuck on the same stream of thoughts, while introspection can lead to different reflections upon the matter you're thinking about.
Yeah, so overthinking is regressive, or at best it can be stagnation. It's not really creative, but introspection is creative and progressive. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yes?
I think overthinking doesn't have much intention, it's just letting the mind go without control, while introspection, there's an intention of doing work.
Okay, so overthinking has no call to action? Can we say that? No intention. Whereas introspection is much more intentional and directed. And I'll add to that one, overthinking has no call to action. Whereas introspection brings activity. There's something which changes in the real world. Yeah. Yes?
Overthinking is often anxiety-driven, it's compulsive, and it's sort of intellectual efforting. Introspection makes room for intuition.
Wonderful. Amazing. Introspection makes room for intuition. Wonderful. I'll add another one to this. Overthinking, and this is coming from a more spiritual angle, overthinking is simply analyzing life according to our thoughts. But what introspection does is it brings in a higher dimensional wisdom through which to observe life. And so in ancient teachings we have something called Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. Guru means spiritual teachers, Sadhu means the saintly visionaries, and Shastra means wisdom or scripture or ancient literature which gives kind of a deeper insights into life. So when we're introspecting, we're looking at life, but we're looking at it through a lens which is higher or broader than our own thoughts. Yeah? Anyone else want to say on this? Overthinking? Yeah, at the back. Okay. Yeah, it's more superficial. Yeah, they say small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, and a lot of overthinking falls in those categories. But great minds discuss wisdom or principles or, higher dimensional ideas or insights. Brilliant. So here you kind of get a bit of a sense of how exercising your introspective ability, taking some time to just pen thoughts, to observe life, to ask yourself, what am I learning from the world around me? This can be extremely, extremely powerful. And our teacher, our founder, Bhaktivedanta Swami, he says, a spiritualist is as introspective as a materialist is speculative. And so people generally do a lot of mental gymnastics, but when we turn that tendency towards looking at life in a deeper way, we actually become very, very wise. And sometimes people ask, like, but what do I do? What do I write about? So sometimes I say journaling is just about observations. It's about observations of yourself. It's about observations of the world. It's observations of other people. And ultimately, it's observations of divinity and how there is divine arrangement, how there's divine plan in my life. And like that, when we begin to actually pen things down, then divine connection, seeing spiritual arrangement, understanding, for example, the law of karma, and how everything that's happening to me is happening for a reason, all of these things become very, very real and tangible. And so the first habit that I've experienced in my life that's really helped is exercising your writing ability, and developing this inner dialogue and this inner kind of decoding and digesting of life. Anyone want to ask anything on journaling or writing or introspecting in general? Yes.
Yeah, I listened to one of your talks a while ago, and it inspired me to start writing, but it kind of just turned into another thing that I do, and it became like, just another habit, and it lost the flavor pretty quickly. So, any inspiration on that?
Yeah. What sometimes happens is when we write, it just ends up becoming a log of events. And I woke up and I did this, and then I went there, and then I did that. And after some time, you think like, oh my God, it becomes a bit dry. One thing you can use is prompts. So there are like, if you go on the internet and write journaling prompts, for example, then there's many, many questions that could come up. Like, for example, there could be a question like, what did you observe in yourself today that you'd like to develop more and more, for example? So those prompts allow you to kind of like dig a little deeper and exercise the thinking capacity. But one thing I would say is that when I asked someone once about writing, they told me the formula of writing is PIP. Perspiration, inspiration, perspiration. That sometimes what happens is when we write, we come face to face with our superficiality. When we pen down our thoughts and we ask ourselves, what did I learn today? What did I observe? What epiphanies or realizations did I have? We find that we don't have much at all. And it's kind of a little displacing because we become, a little crestfallen at how much we're not actually really observing and understanding life in a deeper way. But I think that's where the challenge of writing comes. When you are forced to then dig deeper, think deeper, contemplate, and actually try to really understand things in a deeper way. So I think that feeling of dryness, that feeling of not really having anything that substantial to write is a good one to face, because it's in those moments that we dig deeper and we actually find many, many jewels of insight that we never knew we had. And so, I would say push through. Is that okay? Yes?
In the habit of constantly introspecting throughout the day, is it still kind of makes sense to actually write it?
Yeah, if we're already introspective and we're kind of like thinking about things anyway, is there a value in writing? For me, what I've observed is that when you write, you almost take your mind and you put it in front of you, and then you begin to see your own mind on the paper. Sometimes I feel like when I'm editing my journal and editing my writing, I'm editing my own consciousness. So I've found a very, very useful, it's a very useful exercise to actually write things down. I also find that when I write things down and I edit it and I clarify it and I streamline my thought, I find that that thought becomes instilled within a deeper space in my consciousness just by dint of going through that process. I was just with Mukunda Maharaj this morning, and he was telling me about John Steinbeck, the very famous author. And I think he writes a book called Writing is Just Rewriting. And he would talk about how he would write, and then he would go away for a day and then rewrite it and then rewrite it and then rewrite. And as he would continuously rewrite it, it would be a process of actually crystallizing his thought in the deepest way. And so I would say definitely there's a value in writing down. Yeah. Thank you. Was there another? Yes.
Would you suggest it be a daily event? Do you suggest that it be a daily event, and would there be a better time of the day, for example, at the end of the day to do it?
Yeah, generally the first thing in the morning or the last thing of the day, those are general times when people have found journaling to be very powerful. When you do it in the morning, what it does is it helps you to realign, reprioritize, and remember your principles, remember your goal. It helps you to really solidify your intention. And so that's very, very powerful. And then at the end of the day, it's naturally a good time to reflect on everything that's happened and everything that you've kind of experienced. So yeah, I would say as you like. There's no one way to do it, whatever kind of resonates and helps. Yeah. Yes.
Do you keep like a collection of hard copies of journals over the years that you look back on?
Yeah. Is this on? Oh, it's not. Is the mic on? Okay. Okay. Let me try and speak a little louder. Yeah, so they say honesty is really, really important. And the journal is a place in which you can be honest first with yourself. One reason why it's interesting that we're currently living in what the Vedic scriptures talk about as Kali Yuga. So for those of you who may be less familiar, in the cosmic cycle, it's said that there are 4 kind of cosmic ages, and we're currently living in an age which is said to be the most degraded. And in this age, it's said that generally society rests on 4 pillars. And there's only one pillar remaining in this age. And that pillar is truthfulness, which is kind of interesting because when you look around in the world, you kind of think like there doesn't seem to be much truthfulness around. There doesn't seem to be much honesty around. And so I guess there could be different ways of seeing how society is still resting on truthfulness. But perhaps one of the ways in which we can see that is that when there is honesty, even in one's weakness, even in one's imperfections, if we're able to be honest, then we can progress and we can bring ourselves to become the best versions of ourselves. So why am I saying this in relation to your question? A journal is a great place to be honest. Because the easiest place to start practicing honesty is with yourself. And so for me, I found that having a journal where you could have complete confidentiality is really important. So I've got 25 years of journals, but I never write a hard copy. Because it's like, there's always that thought that what if someone gets hold of this and someone reads it? So I'd actually love to do it by handwriting because I believe that there is also a special power in that. But yeah, I don't. And plus I'm traveling now all the time. So I just do it on a password protected file on my computer. And I don't do hard copies. So yeah, and then what I'll do is like, say for example, today is, I don't know what date it is today, 5th of Feb or whatever. What I'll do often is in the evening, I'll go into my diary and I'll read what did I write on the 5th of Feb 10 years ago? What did I write on this day 20 years ago? And it's incredible because you have to live lives, but you can only sometimes understand it looking backwards. And it's amazing to see divine arrangement. People are very interested in seeing God. And one of the most beautiful ways to see God is to see his interactions, his interventions, his arrangements in your life. And sometimes we're going through life and we don't know how significant it is in that moment. But then when we look back, we can see divine arrangement. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what I do. Thank you. Yeah, maybe last question and then we'll move on. Yes. Yeah, what is that discovery? The first thing is I feel like journaling helps me to actually, we read all these amazing scriptures with all this incredible knowledge. And I think sometimes we read it, but then it's all confirmed in life. And I think one of the things that journaling helps me to discover is the reality of scriptural wisdom. We live in a world now where people are like, why do I need to read this book, or what's it going to give me? But what I often find is that when we read these books and then we reflect and we observe life, become real observers of life, then we see the reality of that scripture. We discover the profundity of that I feel it helps me to discover is God. One person was asked, have you ever seen God? And he said, I don't know if I've ever seen his face, but I see his hand every single day. And so Krishna consciousness is not just meant to be a belief system. It's meant to be a practice and a process by which we can begin to perceive the presence of divinity at every moment in our life. And sometimes divinity is so active, but we just don't have the headspace to be able to detect that. We kind of, like there was a man who was going to an interview and he was late and he couldn't find a parking spot. So he began praying to God, I really need to find a spot, I really need to find a spot. He's praying intensely. Anyway, he turned the corner and there was a parking spot and he looked up at God and said, don't worry, I found one. So it's kind of like that. Like we don't see, we're not even able to detect how, like we sometimes become so like unconscious of how divinity is. How, like we sometimes become so like unconscious of how divinity is like in our lives. So here we're talking about Krishna consciousness. And that means an awareness of divinity, a detection of divinity, of Krishna. And so I find journaling is a beautiful place to find that. Is that okay? All right, I guess I'll move on and then we'll have more time for questions as we move on. In monastic life, we were told when we joined the monastery, you have one locker and everything has to fit in there. And it was a bit of a shift, and it was a bit of a shift to live like that. But it was very, very beautiful. I remember once I went to India, and it was funny. I was on a KLM flight, and as the flight landed, I had this feeling that they've definitely lost my luggage. I don't know. I just had this feeling. And then I got into the baggage reclaim, and sure enough, they had lost the luggage and it had gone to another country. And they said, well, you're going to get it probably in about 3 days. And so I was traveling to Vrindavan, the home of Krishna, the land of Krishna, and I basically just entered with nothing. And it was actually a profound experience, because I realized in that moment how little you actually need in your life, and how overcomplicated and overcluttered our civilization is. One of Srila Prabhupada, our founders, one of his main kind of aphorisms or kind of great utterances was simple living, high thinking. And in a world which is becoming more and more complex, there's really something to be said for this. It's said that basically there is our mind, and then there are things. And what happens is that we get attracted by things, and then we acquire things, and therefore things get into our mind. And then what happens is we acquire those things, and the interesting thing happens that when you acquire those things, some of your mind also enters into that thing. So first the things get into our mind, and then a part of our mind gets invested in all of these things. And as sometimes we acquire more and more, and as our life becomes more and more complicated, then what we sometimes realize is that my consciousness is kind of all over the place. And it becomes harder and harder to do, to actually have clarity in your life, because life is so cluttered. And so a real principle is to ask ourselves, like, how can I declutter my life? In the world now, they talk about decision-making fatigue. How what happens is that people have to make so many decisions on tiny things. That is that they become so tired that when it comes to making big decisions, significant decisions, decisions which are really going to drive the trajectory of life, then what happens is we just don't have any energy left anymore. And so there's a great value to simplifying our surroundings, and actually, as I mentioned, decluttering life. If I asked you, what kind of things do you think you could declutter in your life to create more headspace? Any ideas? What was that? Water? Wardrobe. Oh, okay, there you go. Wardrobe, yes. Social media. Yeah, for sure. Anything else? Belongings. We tend to hang on to a bunch of stuff that we don't need. It's all in the garage. Yeah. Bills. Bills. Let's say finances. What else? Pardon me? Kitchen, yes. Your desk. It sounds just so simple, but I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but if you actually begin doing this, it's amazing. Yeah, sorry, someone here. Yeah. Kids' toys. Men's toys as well. Cars. Yeah. Yeah, when we look at it, there's so many things we could kind of simplify in our life. What the world tries to do is convince us that the more options we have, the better our life is. And therefore, if you look at the world today, it's just about expanding the number of options. More and more options mean a better and better life. But actually, it's more about greater and greater discernment, greater and greater discriminatory power, greater and greater clarity in terms of what is my purpose and what are my principles, and then making decisions in line with that. And in order to do that, sometimes simplifying the options can really help. And this is another habit. These are kind of simple things, But just simplifying life, less is more. Sometimes it just helps to actually have a much better direction and purpose and meaning in your life like that. Anyone want to ask anything about this? Simplicity and decluttering, yeah.
You're talking about so many options that we're provided, and almost like that's a boon in today's society, but I just think we have so many almost spiritual choices, so many outlets, so many different ways to take, and almost so many options in the world of different religious or spiritual paths, and all these sort of things to try and build yourself up to be this really like best version of yourself. Is there a, I don't want to say declutter, but a simplifying version of just sort of finding more bite-sized ways to grow rather than trying to take everything?
Yeah, there's also a whole kind of variety of spiritual paths and spiritual offerings out there, and sometimes that can end up also being confusing, or it can we can kind of do a bit of everything and nothing of anything substantial. So how do we kind of deal with that? The first thing is that what we could look at is that amongst the variety of spiritual paths out there, there are clearly universal principles that they all espouse, which can be very, very beneficial for our lives. And so sometimes it's about understanding those kind of universal things that every spirit. But yeah, I think there is something to be said that sometimes we can become spiritual shoppers. And we do a bit of window shopping of everything and never really purchase anything. It's like you can put so much food in your mouth, but at one point you need to close your mouth and start chewing to really experience the benefit of it. And so I would say, yeah, definitely that we can appreciate all traditions, we can learn from all traditions. I think we can have the broad-mindedness and the depth to be able to see unity and diversity. But then at one point it also makes sense to do something with depth. Bruce Lee once said, I don't fear the person who knows 1,000 kicks. I fear the person who's practiced one kick 1,000 times. And perhaps that can be more powerful and impactful in our life if we're able to do one thing, but do it with some genuine depth. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes?
What would be a good strategy to declutter the mind? Because I find that I have a lot of ideas and a lot of things that I want to do, but the mind just gets really cluttered with how am I going to go and start that? How do I get to do those things that I need to do before I kick the bucket? So it's kind of like, but the mind just gets so cluttered with all the process of doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean, besides the fact that I have a garage full of stuff and I also have to declutter. Everyone's looking at me in this room that knows me. So, but I'll get there. But the mind, I find that's the one thing that can get really cluttered with all the thoughts of the things that I would like to do, mostly, for Srila Prabhupada, and then I have all these ideas. I want to do this with my cooking, but my mind's just putting all these obstacles in the way. So it's kind of like I need to declutter my mind. That's what I understand anyway from what you're saying.
Yeah, so how to go about decluttering the mind, how to go about being more focused.
Yes.
In what we're trying to achieve in our life, yeah.
Yes.
Well, another thing that I try to do in my journal is a kind of 3-step thing called visualization, orientation, and then I say association. So I'll explain what I mean by this. Like, visualization means to regularly remind yourself of your highest priorities. It means to have your North Star very, very clear. It means, yesterday we were talking about Dharma and how there's Swadharma and Sanatan Dharma. And therefore, regularly realigning oneself with one's highest vision. What do I have to achieve before, as you say, we kick the bucket or time runs out? Always, one of the questions I tell people, which is indicative of your spiritual health, is how often do you remind yourself and ask yourself the question, what is my ultimate goal? The more we're aware of that and asking that question, we have a visualization which helps to keep everything in perspective. And then the second thing is orientation, which means once you know where you're trying to go, what that North Star is, what your deepest why is, do you have the how and the what? Do you know what you need to do tomorrow? Do you have a plan? Do you have a step-by-step progress towards that ultimate aspiration? And so what's lacking in many of our lives is we have an idea, we have an aspiration, but we don't have a plan. And without a plan, it's just a dream. And dreams kind of come and they go. And other things can take over dreams. And so, along with having a visualization and a remembrance of that, we should also have an orientation, a step-by-step plan. The great teacher, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, explained how every Ekadashi, so Ekadashi is a fasting day we do every 2 weeks where we refrain from grains. And he would say this was a time when he would plan his next 2 weeks and be very, very deliberate about what he's trying to achieve. And then the final is association. I think just making sure that you surround yourself with people who remind you of your visualization and your orientation. Our mind often becomes cluttered because we kind of engage with other people's whose minds are also cluttered, and then it becomes like the mind squared. So it's good to also surround yourself with people who remind you of your why, your how, and your what, like that. Some thoughts. Yeah. Did I see one more hand here? Was there? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Should I go to those places and accumulate all my possessions together and rearrange them, declutter? Or is that okay to have them just sitting there, like, and it's only
that overseas Swiss bank account? Yeah, again, I think we have to be realistic as well. I'm not kind of sitting here suggesting you all kind of live from a locker and kind of that's it now, you know. I think we have to be realistic. We live lives, you know, we move, we need different aspects of security. I guess just asking ourselves, is it necessary? I think that's the question. We live in a world where luxuries have become necessities. And we almost think we need way more than we actually. Just about asking ourselves, do we need this? Because definitely, the more things there are, there's a sense in which, yeah, like I said, a part of your mind gets locked away. And then our mind becomes very, very splayed out. So I think it's just a necessity. Like, is it actually a necessity? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
And then based on the result of that internal discussion, you can make some intelligent decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Like how does this contribute to what I'm trying to achieve? Yeah. In Sanskrit, there's a very beautiful terminology, yukta vairagya. So what this is a type of renunciation which is called devotional renunciation or connected renunciation. And it's the idea that you don't necessarily... Life is not just about giving up everything, but it's about consciously utilizing everything you have for the higher purpose that you're searching for. And that's actually considered a higher type of renunciation than necessarily just giving things up. So yeah, the point here that's being made is that decluttering means decluttering those things that don't really contribute to where I'm trying to go, and everything else that I do have in my possession that can be used to speed up my progress towards my goal can be embraced in a very pure way, like that. Yeah, thank you. Yes? Yeah.
You've been teaching all this stuff for 30 years, Stephen. How do you keep it fresh? You came back with one line, which I later learned was paraphrasing C.S. Lewis. The more you listen to your conscience, the more it demands of you. And that was his entire answer.
Would you like to expand on that? What you took from that?
The conscience is often a quiet voice within that we even drown out with being super busy. If we do take the time to still ourselves and we start paying attention to our value system and our inner dictation, over time it gets louder and louder, and over time it gives us practical guidance about where we go. We could say it's super soul, creating enough sense of stillness and openness that we're prepared to listen to super soul's dictates and direction. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And it's a nice actually segue into the kind of next habit that I wanted to share with you. I call it looking back to look forward. And as monks, books became our best friends, and spending time looking at life through the vision of the great sages and through divine words found in the Vedic scriptures really became a part of life. And this is really, really powerful, because many of you may have heard me say this before, but if you tell a lie loud enough and long enough, then a lie can become a so-called truth. Scarier than that is if enough people accept that so-called truth, then that truth becomes a culture. Scarier than that is if a culture is then perpetuated from one generation to the next, it can become a tradition. And scarier than that is that many of us will be born into a tradition, and we will direct our entire life and our life goals based on a tradition that's based on a so-called culture, based on a so-called truth that's actually a lie. And so, what is that means by which we have to, what means and what methods do we have to actually uncover what is truth, what is lies, what are just things that have been perpetuated in the world that I don't necessarily have to take so seriously? It's interesting, many of us will say, for example, I say the biggest lie in the world is that material achievements, material arrangements, material relationships, material accolades will make you happy. And one of the reasons why I say it's the biggest lie in the world is because even though many of us, myself included, will say that we don't believe in this lie, if we look at our behaviors, if we look at our intuitive responses to kind of situations, we act with this lie in mind. We're still driven by it. And therefore, scripture and higher dimensional wisdom is a beautiful way of distinguishing truth from illusion. In the world now, they say there are different biases by which we kind of accept something to be true. For example, perhaps the most common bias is consensus bias. We tend to believe something to be true based on how many people believe it to be true. In other words, if many people believe something to be true, we're more likely to accept it as truth ourselves. History shows that's not a very safe way of defining or determining truth. Another bias is framing bias. We're much more likely to accept something as true depending on how it's communicated, how it's presented, and how it's articulated by someone. And therefore, someone who's able to communicate something very as true, regardless of the substance that there is there. Another type of bias is called anchoring bias. That oftentimes we accept things as true, those things which we hear first. The first thing we hear, like say for example, if you've never met someone and someone says something about that person, then what happens is you're much more likely to put more weight on that, almost unconsciously, than anything you then subsequently hear about that person, because we have an anchoring bias, which again doesn't have much substance, but which determines our vision of reality. There is also something called attentional bias. We're much more likely to accept something as true, which is repeatedly. Another bias is a self-serving bias. We're much more true if it fulfills or if it gratifies my immediate needs. Whereas something which challenges us, something which seems a bit uncomfortable, we're much more likely to reject. All of this tells us life, and these lies have good view. And so, scriptures or higher dimensional wisdom help to expose this illusion, expose these lies. The ancient scripture, the Bhagavad Purana, begins with a verse in which it glorifies the knowledge by saying that this book distinguishes reality from illusion. And it is extremely powerful. Generally what happens is our worldview is determined by three things, or two things: our nature and our nurture. The way we look at life is dependent on a certain psychological disposition that we have when we're born, and then it's further kind of developed by the upbringing that we have. And therefore most of us have a vision of life which is created through nature and nurture. But spirituality or higher dimensional wisdom allows us to build on our vision of life given by nature and nurture and uplift it to a higher level. And that's why ancient wisdom books are so powerful. And so there are many beautiful things said. There are many beautiful things said about the glories of reading spiritual wisdom. One verse tells us in Sanskrit, I'll say it for you. Maline moshanam pumsham jalashnanam dine dine Gita Shakrit Bhashishnanam Samsara Malanashanam. This verse is glorifying the Bhagavad Gita. And the verse tells us that just as we have a bath every day with water to cleanse our body, those who bathe their minds every day in the higher dimensional words of scripture, they actually cleanse their consciousness through that immersion in wisdom. So if you think about a bath in the morning, the first thing the bath does is it wakes you up. And then as you stay underneath the water, then the second thing it does is it cleanses your body. And as you stay even longer, it actually becomes quite an enjoyable experience. So bathing in scripture or wisdom books is kind of like that. In the beginning, when you open these books, it just kind of wakes you up to truths and an understanding of life that we may not have grasped previously. And as we read it more and more, it begins to cleanse our consciousness. And eventually, reading these books of wisdom is not just an intellectual exercise, but it actually becomes relishable, because one actually realizes there's a whole world I can actually absorb myself in. These are not just books, but these are a transcendent world of spiritual experience that I can enter into. And so the third habit that I really share with everyone is make books a part of your life, make reading a part of your life. A Harvard study actually says that Just by reading 8 minutes a day, it can reduce your stress by 48%. So I'd love to show you here actually, but I have a chart of the most creative people in the world. That means artists, activists, philosophers, and it looks at their daily routine. And when you look at these very, very creative people, there's two things that stand out about their daily routines. One was that practically all of them rose early in the morning. They were all early risers. And the other common quality which you see amongst all of these creative people is that they were all avid readers. And so in a world today where our attention is so being diminished really, really quickly, reading is becoming less and less common, and it's something that perhaps we can look at how to change in our lives. So yeah, that's the third habit that I wanted to share with you. Anyone want to ask anything about reading, wisdom? It's kind of higher dimensional lens, yeah.
Naturally, what you actually read is important, because if you read just fiction, kind of meaningless fiction, that's not going to have the same effect as if substantive.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so the quality of the information that we're also taking in matters in a big way. In the world we're living in today, we are drowning in information. At university, I studied information management, and it's interesting that you can be blinded in two ways. One way you can be blinded is if all the lights go out, and another way you can get blinded is by having so much light that you can't decipher anything. And therefore it also matters not just to read, but to read in a conscious way. So maybe I can I was mentioning just the Bhagavad Purana here, sorry, just because I've got this, it just helps me to note things down, and it maybe helps you to follow. The Bhagavad Purana is an ancient scripture, and it's mentioned that in order to grasp it, you have to be a good listener, you have to be a good reader. And it uses 4 examples to explain the qualities of a good reader or a good listener. So the first one is a chataka bird. What in English that would be a thunderbird, is it? I think so, a thunderbird. And then the second example that's given is of a parrot. The third one is given of a swan. And the fourth one is a fish. So the ancient scripture says these 4 entities have 4 key qualities which empower you to actually become a good reader or a good listener. So the quality of the chataka is that it's said that the thunderbird, when it drinks directly from the cloud. In other words, when the cloud rains, instead of waiting for that rainwater to hit the ground and get some level of contamination, it instead takes directly from the source. And that bird tells us that the lesson we learn from that is that when we want to read, we should try to read from the most authentic, pure, unmotivated sources. And of course, one has to then search out what are those pure sources from which we can get untainted, unbiased wisdom. The parrot, the quality we learn from the parrot is that the parrot is able to hear something and then repeat it. And many versions are given of this, but one of the versions is that we should hear and then we should discuss what we hear. And by discussing it with others, we actually can go much deeper. The swan, that example is given of a good reader. The quality we learn from the swan is that the swan is able to separate, it said, milk from water. And therefore, when we read, we should be able to distill, what is this telling me in my life? What does this mean for me when I wake up tomorrow morning? What is the call to action? What is the essence of this knowledge? And the fish, the quality given drawn from the fish is that a fish always keeps his eyes open. And therefore it said that one should be very, very attentive. One should be very, very absorbed. And one should be very, very present when they read or when they listen. And by doing these 4 things, we can maximize our ability to draw wisdom from reading or listening like that. So, some thoughts. How are we doing for time? And what time are we going to? 11:30, right? Okay, so then maybe I'll just take a couple of more questions. And then,
Maharaj, do you think you can identify objectively what is the most beneficial scripture, or is there a hierarchy of scriptures? And because you said you have to, bathe your intellect in scripture with scripture, so is there a process for identifying which is the most pure, which is best, or yes?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, this can be okay, let me share with you something. So the Sanskrit word tattva means truth. So one of the great teachers within our tradition, his name is Keshava Swami. So he writes a book called Tattva Sandarbha. And the very first thing he does in that book is he questions how do you know what you know? In philosophy, we call this epistemology. So where do you go for knowledge? So his methodology is very, very interesting. He says there are 3 ways of acquiring knowledge: pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. Pratyaksha means to gain knowledge through your senses. Anuman means to get knowledge through logical inference. And Shabda means to get knowledge from a higher source than you. And so he says that of all of these 3 ways of gaining knowledge, each of them have value, but these 2 are inherently limited because your sensual and intellectual mental perception is limited. Right now we can't really see what's going on beyond this wall. Or our mind only has a limited amount of experiences, so we can only perceive a certain amount through our logical reasoning. And so he says, if you want the highest truth, you have to go to someone or some source which has a perception broader than yours. So he says, okay, so we need to listen to someone. So he says there are 2 sources, material or spiritual. Now you've agreed that you need to hear from someone. Who are you going to hear from? He says if you hear from a material source, then you're back to square one, because a material source is getting their knowledge from pratyaksha and anuman. So that will inherently be limited. So he says you can't get knowledge here and you can't get knowledge here. Therefore you have to try to find a spiritual source, because a spiritual source has a higher dimensional knowledge beyond the mind and senses. So he said, okay, great. But there are many spiritual sources in the world. So which spiritual source should I go to? So he says that amongst the various theologies and spiritual practices of the world, there is an evolution of thought. According to Jiva Goswami and the Eastern teachers, no one tradition has a monopoly on spirituality. But at the same time, to say that they're all the same would also be inaccurate. Therefore, there's an evolution of theology. So he says, how are you able to determine which is the highest theology? Detail, How much philosophical detail does it have? Intimacy. What level of intimate knowledge of divinity can it give you? Auspiciousness. What benefit and transformational power does it have in individuals' lives and in the world when it's applied? Accessibility. Who can do it, and do you need any special qualifications to do it? And beauty. How much is the poetic and literary charm of what it's explaining? So he says, generally what you'll see is that the highest theologies or the most evolved theologies thrive on all of these factors. And how do you determine which is the most evolved theology? It will have these 5 things to a superlative degree. So then Jiva Goswami says, amongst all the theologies of the world, on these objective criteria, what you'll find is that the theological revelation of the Vedas thrives on all 5 of these qualities. Now, everyone will have to see for themselves, but Jiva Goswami says this is the fact that he's deciphered. But then he says amongst the Vedas there are many, many books. And so what he says is amongst the Vedas there are the Shrutis, there are the Smritis. Sorry, this is a little technical, but because you asked. And amongst them there is the Puranas. Purana is a Sanskrit word. Purna means perfect. And so he says Puranas means those books which bring you to the perfect conclusion. So he says amongst the Vedas there are the Puranas. And if you want to go to them, if you want to get the essence, you go to them. But then he says there are 18 Puranas. So which of those do you go to? So he says there are 6 which are in tamas, or what we call the, for those who are in a more ignorant energy. There are 6 in rajas for those who are looking for material benefits. And there are 6 in sattva for those who are looking for elevation of consciousness. So he says then you have to go to the sattva. But then there are 6 of them. So which one do you then go to? And then he says amongst them there is one book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavat Purana. And he says that is considered Amala Purana, or that Purana which has no material ingredient added to it, purely spiritual. And so in the Tattva Sandarbha, that's how there are 4 branches of philosophy, and one of them is known as epistemology. And epistemology means how do you know you know. So this is a very essential part of philosophy, because how are you getting your knowledge? And that's why we go to scripture, because he's given this breakdown to explain why we need to go to something beyond us. Does that make sense? Was that a question? Okay, you can say and then I can repeat it.
So if you're looking for a fast self-realization, or you're looking for like your inner calling, like a understanding that you think you need within, do you have a suggestion on like which specific one a person should go to?
Which scripture?
Yeah, like what would be like what would be like a guideline for like the quickest scripture that will help you with your spiritual understanding throughout all those?
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, amongst all the scriptures, I've mentioned here the Bhagavat Purana, and in other places it's mentioned that the Bhagavad Gita is the book which has all the basic spiritual truths and principles that each one of us need to learn in our life. So, the Bhagavad Gita basically contains 5 topics. The first topic of the Bhagavad Gita is the soul, or who we are. The next topic of the Bhagavad Gita is the world, or the kind of environment that we're currently living in. The third topic of the Bhagavad Gita is karma, or activity. The fourth topic of the Bhagavad Gita is time. And the fifth topic of the Bhagavad Gita is God, divinity, or kind of transcendence. So, this is very, very powerful, because the idea is that this is the blueprint of cosmic reality. The idea is that any conceivable question that one could come up with in their life, if you understand these 5 topics in depth, then you can basically answer any existential question. Not just that, but what these 5 topics do is that the Bhagavad Gita is ultimately a book of yoga. And the word yoga means connection. And so the Bhagavad Gita is not just a book which equips you with the philosophy to decode everything that's going on in the world, but the Bhagavad Gita is also a spiritual science which connects you to divinity. And when one is connected to divinity, then what happens is you get that intuition. What you're basically asking is, where do we get that intuition to know where I need to go in my life and what I need to do? So yoga is the process by which, as spiritual beings, we connect with divinity. And when that connection is made, we're almost guided by intuition. But that's a process. So yeah, these are the books which kind of unpack how this actually can become possible. Is that okay? Okay, yeah, I'll just take a few more questions and then we'll kind of break. Yeah, so 1, 2, and 3.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. What are your thoughts on, we can get all these books online now and we can get them in physical form. What are your thoughts on the potency? Is there a lesser potency reading online compared to, say, having a book in your hand?
Yeah, so physical books versus online books, ebooks. Is there a difference? In essence, no. Knowledge is knowledge. In whichever way it's conveyed, if it's conveyed with purity, the medium is simply a container. However, there is a sense in which sitting in front of a book can, well, let me say the other way. There is a sense in which accessing information via technology can engender a certain consciousness that doesn't allow us to devotionally necessarily connect in the purest way. When we have technology, there's a sense of controlling, analyzing, flipping from here to there. There's a lot of distraction, and therefore sometimes the quality of immersion may not be as good as just when you sit in a room, open a book, and just sit with the words and try to absorb them. Having said that, if someone is desiring, my understanding is that they can get the benefit from either. But there is a beauty to just reading a book. Thank you. Who was next? Yes. Oh, okay. Maybe here and then next into there.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. So I was recently in a conversation with a few different devotees, and I heard that with Srimad Bhagavatam, if you don't have a personal spiritual master and you haven't taken initiation, that you shouldn't read it sequentially. And there are a few mixed answers with that. What's your recommendation for somebody in that situation where they don't have a spiritual master but they wish to read more?
Thank you so much. Spiritual knowledge is always understood through teachers. There are different types of spiritual master. one type of spiritual master is the one that you may make a formal commitment to and take a formal initiation from. Regardless of whether one has a formal spiritual master or not, every single person has the opportunity to have teachers in their lives. And in Sanskrit, that is known as a Shiksha Guru. And so definitely, if you want to learn scripture, in the very first purport of the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada gives 3 qualities of someone who wants to understand the Bhagavad Gita. He says, number 1, they should read it very scrutinizingly. He says, number 2, they should read it without any personal motivation. And number 3, they should read it with the help of someone who's living that knowledge. And so we should try to find someone who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Someone who knows the scripture, but not just that, someone who's living the scripture. And not just that, someone who has the ability and the depth because of their understanding and realization to explain it to us. And in that way they can show us the way. And that may or may not be a formal initiated spiritual master. It may just be another person who's further along the journey. But definitely when we learn from those. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita for 2 years. And then I remember coming into the temple one day and listening to one class. And I think I learned more in that one class than I did in 2 years of reading myself. It was very humbling, actually. That's not to say you shouldn't read by yourself, but when we couple it with hearing, it's much more powerful. Is that okay? All right. Yes, maybe the final question, and then I guess we can break here. Back here.
Thank you, Maharaj, for sharing your wisdom today with us all. I just had a question about you were talking about the Bhagavad Gita and the 5 times.
The 5 topics.
God,
yeah, this,
and
yeah.
One was activity or karma.
Karma.
And I was wondering how do you know, like for example, you might find yourself in a particular situation and you might say, that's my karma, or you might say, that's Krishna's arrangement. And how do you know the difference? What is Krishna's arrangement and what is your karma?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, in one sense, everything is Krishna. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Maya Dhyakshena Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam. Everything is working under my direction. So in one sense, even if we say something is karma, but karma is not just the arbitrary law. Who was it set up by? Set up by Krishna. So it's mentioned that everyone is experiencing everything. Like they say, not a blade of grass moves without the will of divinity. However, it's said that when one becomes interested in treading the path back to eternity, when one turns themselves towards divinity, desiring to walk in that direction, then it's said as you take 1 step to Krishna, then Krishna takes 10 steps towards you. And so for anyone on the spiritual journey, they're not just receiving their reactions by a law of karma, but Krishna is specifically administering their karma in a very purposeful way that will help them to actually accelerate their spiritual journey like that. So the idea is that as soon as one begins the spiritual journey, then the hand of God is directly in their life, administering certain situations in order to accelerate their spiritual growth. And therefore, whenever we're in a situation, our tendency is to meditate on how does this make me feel. Whenever we're in a situation, that's generally our meditation. How does this make me feel? But when one understands the law of karma, then the other meditation that they have in any given situation is, what is this teaching me? What am I meant to learn? Not everything that happens is good, but something good can come from everything that happens. And therefore, karma is very purposeful and very empowering, actually, because it means life is not random, and it means everything has meaning. Like that. Is that okay? All right. So I think the time is, we're at 12:30 now, 11:30. So I think we're going to take a break here, is it? Yeah, we're going to take a bit of a break here, and then we'll kind of come back and see where we go in the next session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Just to quickly extend on what Maharaj has just said, the lunch break we'll have a picnic-style lunch, which is served on the grassy area in front of the Krishna village serving area. So please, we feel like it's a really important part of today's program to keep in this communal experience here and the mood of sharing, keep discussing what we've been hearing all this morning. As Maharaj elucidated, that the more we're discussing this, the more we'll absorb as well. So in front of the Krishna Village Prasadam area, 12 o'clock lunch will be served. So please just keep in a group together, even though there's many, many acres that we could go and explore and have lunch. If we could all just keep together, I think that'll help that mood stay nicely together. Have time for a freshen up, chant Gayatri. It's from 12:30 if anyone cares. Yeah, so that's it. We will see you back here around 1 o'clock, 1:30 to start the Q&A with Maharaj. And that's it. Hare Krishna. Just an addition for everyone, there will be a kirtan by Narahari Prabhu from 1 o'clock until 1:30 here in the yoga hall, so that's ecstatic. Be here for that.
I'll just come forward a bit.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, that's fine.
Raj, if I knew you were going on Raj Mandal Parakram, I would have come.
You would come.
Yeah, but I didn't know.
Yeah, I was kind of contemplating whether to go with so many people. But I wanted to go once just with the group to kind of just learn the route and just become more familiar with the geography of Braj.
Yes.
And then I think we can do some Braj exploring in the coming years, you know.
So was it a bit intense in the group?
It was a bit intense. I don't do so
Were you
well
in
in
VIP,
crowds.
I guess? You stayed overnight?
Oh yeah, I was out.
Yeah. Did you go
Oh, so
barefoot?
you've done it before, many times. 2 times. Oh, okay. I did barefoot for 15 days. And
Yeah, I find that now my feet just fall apart, and then I'm meditating on my feet. So I did it once or twice. That's it. So now I wear shoes. I don't know if I'll go again, but yeah, I've done it a few times. But if I knew you were there, I would have come. So if you do go again, let me know. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Just wanted to ask, are you familiar with the podcast, The Diary of the CEO, with Stephen Bartlett?
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah, yeah. He interviews different people.
And I think he's got maybe 5 or 6 million subscribers.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's very interesting. He's one of the world's top podcasts. It's pretty hard to get into it. He interviews like the most expert people in the world, even in the area of finance, health. Very alternative. He's got very alternative edge to it. Like he often gets criticized. He's in UK in that program called, I think, the Dragon's Den.
Okay.
He's in that, yeah. And I've actually written to them suggesting that they should get you on their podcast, but it's pretty hard because you actually got to fill out certain forms to actually get on it. But I just thought, because recently had Jordan Peterson on it.
Okay.
You're familiar with Jordan
Yeah,
Peterson?
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. And I've got great respect for Jordan Peterson. He's pretty good in a lot of areas, but it was all about spirituality.
Yeah.
And it was actually that's the title I gave for my letter, a very unsatisfying episode. Normally his episodes are really good in the area, but I just find it was really, really lacking substance. And he's Stephen Bartlett is actually really starting to he's quite a genuine seeker, and yeah, I just sort of felt that if you could try to get into the podcast, write to them. I mean, well,
Thank you.
I've actually encouraged
Sounds
other people
exciting.
to also start writing, and the more your name comes up. I thought out of all the people, you'd be probably one of the most qualified in terms of not only your spiritual knowledge, but obviously you've got a
To bridge the gap, yeah.
Yes, sort of like recognition in the media. It would be amazing.
That would be amazing, yeah. Well,
to get onto
let's see.
that episode.
Ask them and then ask you.
Yeah,
Pardon?
yeah.
Ask them and then ask you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think,
Happy
that
to
would
try.
be amazing because Lord Chaitanya's movement is, I can see the signs how it's gaining more and more prominence, and like using this platform would be amazing, like redemption preach by the
Yeah.
I just want to introduce this is my son Ranga.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Very fortunate he's been born into the movement.
Okay, cool.
And that's she met the devotees when she was 15.
Oh, wow.
I think she's one of your ardent followers. I think she heard every single class you've ever hosted on.
She knows all your jokes.
Oh, she knows all my joke. Yeah, that's bad joke.
So I just,
Nice,
and
thank you
she
for
was
coming.
actually contemplating going to the UK.
Oh,
earlier
to
last
spend a
year,
bit of time
just
at the
to-
manor?
Oh, just more like
Okay.
specifically, I think, to see you there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
My
Yeah.
wish has come true, but you
We always have so many people coming over to the manor from New Govardhan, so it would be nice, yeah. Yeah, I guess in the future that might come. I don't know what the timeline of that looks like. Maybe a few years from now it could still be. Yeah, but we're welcome to keep in touch if you want to send over any questions or anything on email. We're happy to help in any way we can.
Maybe we can start a wait list. Can get to the top of it. And start on point.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hello, through Hare Krishna. Nice to see you. Yes,
Very appreciative of your saver. Never got to meet you at the moment. Very well aware of you and doing so much.
Madhav.
No, but I'd also love your feedback. I have a team, and they know what's going on. They share with me
Yeah, you need me. Yeah, until Mark leaves and I'll go.
the day? Or?
Not just as whenever we're driving Maharaj your class on the car, and they just love your classes. They give you give initiations, they want to take initiations from you in their future. Are you planning anything, Maharaj?
Maybe a few years from now. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Wishing you the best.
How can we make the kids get better in spirituality? We make them chant. Is it a question that needs to be asked in the class? That
Of course, they're intelligent. They already have spiritual parts, otherwise they couldn't be You're so busy that I can't give the chance. I think if you look at example, if you enjoy coming to the temple, everything will come from this.
We'll figure it out.
I'll take them, I'll get to my daughter.
Okay, that's good. Okay, good.
I'll pay you that for them.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Sham, Ian and I, Sham Sunday, that's not for my great Sham, Maharaj,
Yeah, sure.
Present, because she's
So much for coming and inspiring for your classes. I listen to all the time when we're driving, me, my husband and the kids. And we find it so inspiring. And I also used to live at the manor, do a lot of service retribution around the time, 98 and 2003. And we did like a lot of traveling in Africa and all places. Maheshwari. Rajasthana was the other girl. And I was the other one with the car.
Okay, now I recognize you. No, I do recognize you.
But I find you so inspiring, and thank you so much. And I wanted to ask about like the summer or the festivals you might be doing, or like seminars in Europe, because my daughters will be there.
Oh, okay. We're doing something with Sachinanda Maharaj. We're in Switzerland, in the mountains. That's at the end of July.
I don't know this there.
It's called Rise, is it, Mark?
No, it's called the Bhakti Retreat.
Okay, I will look that up.
Because
my daughter also went to his, or the other daughter, I read her one.
Oh, okay.
She went there too. But anyway, we get a quick signature, and I don't want to waste the time because it's lunchtime. But I'm so happy that you came to Australia. Yes, yeah. Kenya twice we went. It was like a really nice tour, and it's keeping me going even now. It's like I work at the Gurukul here, so it's all good. I am a teacher for the level now. Yeah, and my kids are all becoming devotees, so it's all good. Yeah.
Where are you from?
Hungary. Shivaram Swami is my spiritual master, but yeah, we don't get to go back there much. Every 2 years. We're going this year. Anyway, they're going to stay probably at the manor, actually.
Oh, we can do some time in the ashram there. That'd be amazing. Yeah. A few are coming this year, I think. And we do something. You can come for like a month, 3 months, or you can do a bunch of shastri. And the manor is a great place. You learn a lot there, and it's the whole world.
Also 2 years ago, she stayed at the manor, and then with the Pandava saying to me, thank you so much.
Nice to see you. Okay, in the place? Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming.
Get the plate, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Is there a plate already there?
Come to New Government regularly?
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you so much for inspiring us in so many ways, Maharaj.
You are our guru. we watch all the videos and we feel so connected. Like.
Where are you from? Back in India?
I also used to live in Surat.
Okay. You've been in Australia a long time?
No, in 2018.
Okay, both of you?
We recently got married.
India, mainly Mumbai.
Vrindavan, busy.
Now with my main services in Europe, Africa.
Oh.
That's now maybe one month in India.
Because in Australia we don't get many more. We'll be ready by the time. Welcome. Sure. I can.
Nice to see you both. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
See you. My name is Subal. Yeah, actually from South Africa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just moved to Australia 4 years ago.
Which part of South Africa?
Durban, actually, like 5 minutes away.
Right around now.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Grew up there. Spent about but your friends like spiritual crisis and just thank you from the heart. Deeply appreciate all of this almost every day. And it's kind of surreal being here. It's like I feel like I really reach people kind of thing. It's like you know, and I just think it really inspiring. Yeah.
Is that where you stay? Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think we're doing we're just for 1.5 days.
But I don't know some of the programs.
Great to connect and see. What's your job?
I'm the photographer. Thank you so much. Sorry.
So we can see, yeah.
Yes, kind of seeing there's been some different and if anything in the meantime, there's
Very kind, yeah, no, I just feel devotees are very kind of every chat. But we meet in business.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Because this is more in-depth discussion. Maybe we can make a time and talk about this properly. Because if we do now, it will be very rushed. But yeah, definitely we can look into this. So are you here?
I'm here. I'll be in Brisbane too.
Okay, so we'll make a time. And then can we sit down and we'll talk about it properly because just for everyone. Otherwise be able to discuss it.
I'll organize. I've got your number.
So definitely we have the affiliations program, so definitely we can do something. We're also launching the Wisdom Leads community. Obviously you know it because you are rebranding. So we're also going to launch a whole variety of content from there, so we can see what's the best way to do it.
Because you're launching mentoring the mentors as well as
Yeah, we're going to do that as well. Future trends.
no problem. You can give me a time.
Yeah.
I'll
So do that.
tomorrow to work out.
Can I have you can see it. My mom wants to see it. My mom wants to
Alright, thank you, Sujita. Thank you. Hare Krishna, nice to see you.
Well, thank you so much, Maharaj, for coming. It was, I hear your lecture and probably everything that you have on our social media. I subscribe to everything, and it was so much in awe and reverence after seeing you personally. So, thank you so much for coming here.
You're based here in Victoria?
We are in Brisbane.
We're in Brisbane.
Yeah. My name is Rajni Sadasi.
So you connected with the community there?
Yes. So, it's called Brisbane, of course.
Janardhan
And
Prabhu?
yes, and then we have a new temple, the Hare Krishna temple.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
right from
it's
that
right.
way.
So we serve
So you do
the
both?
temple. We serve at the Hare Krishna temple more regularly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And my husband, Ranjay, he listens to you.
Okay.
He's like a fan, and I wanted him to be here, but because of the school, he couldn't come.
Will you just come to the day?
I'm here. Yes, I'm here to tomorrow.
Think of the Bhagavatam as a deity and think of yourself as a pujari. When the pujari goes down to the altar every day, the deity is already beautiful. And all the pujari has to do is, with their devotion and whatever skill they have, dress the deity in a particular way. But ultimately, when people see the deity, it will always be beautiful because the deity is beautiful. So like that, who are we? We don't have so much to give, but the Bhagavatam is powerful, and if we decorate the Bhagavatam with sincerity, with purity, then the Bhagavatam will touch people's hearts. So we are who are we? Very small, but the Bhagavatam will touch people's hearts. As a service. And we need more and more teachers. We need people to be able to share wisdom. So the best way to become a speaker is just keep speaking. Every time you have opportunity, never say no. And you'll learn. You'll go deeper and you'll become better.
At Hare Krishna temple, Baba is also conduct kids classes, like during children around age 4 onwards up to age 12. Age 12 come.
Yeah, I just said last year.
I hope that I'll get an opportunity to see you in Brisbane because I want my son to meet you, and I have a lot of questions for him.
Okay.
So thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Your name? Kairava. know Prem Rupamadava, Premi? You know
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
We were just together in Melbourne. They're traveling around doing the Harinam.
Yeah.
And then someone contacted you from Mendoza.
Mendoza?
Is that in Argentina?
Yes, it's in Argentina.
They were asking me at one point. South America is one continent I've never been to.
Yeah.
At one point it would be nice to come there.
Thank you so much for the class. It was amazing. I am very happy. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
She wants to come to Manor as well.
Maybe.
I don't, yeah, because when they're here, they come from London. I am not. When I say from London, everybody says I want to come. So she would like to come. So she just was telling me, I said, oh, that'll be really nice.
You have to come with all of them. And
of course. So that'll be nice to encourage them and your association.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, are the kids all right? Kids are going back to school after school.
Yeah, we have a wonderful place. Growing stronger in Krishna.
There's even different timelines.
We stay with the devotees. Keep the coming.
Bring all of them.
Whenever people ask me, that's what I recommend them to do. I would say, yes, we have life decisions to make, and sometimes they bring anxiety, and we're not quite sure. But if you just get busy in doing something meaningful, just get inspired and get news about the different things that we're doing. And I think in that service, Krishna begins to reveal everything in terms of where you need to be and what life situation is the best. I never saw sannyas as an achievement. I just saw it as an opportunity to serve. I think the sannyasis are inherently more advanced and more just a different way of life that can give us an opportunity to serve, which is what service is to real. Okay. Yeah, I heard about it. I've not been there, but I heard, yeah.
Yeah, I was there for 8 months and I left in May. Before I left, my teachers advised me to take sannyasa, and I wasn't ready. I had too many desires I wanted to chase.
Yeah, take time. It's a lifelong commitment. Not to be taken lightly. Meditate. Krishna will make it clear. And if you have a spiritual master, they can also guide you. That will come in the future as well, I'm sure. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Nice to see you.
I'm actually from London.
Oh, you're from London?
So come
Okay.
and say Hare Krishna.
Hare
And
Krishna.
it's nice to hear
You're
from my
living
own
here now?
hometown. Yes, we've been here about 5 years.
You grew up in London? Or how? London. Whereabouts? In Road or?
East Lane?
East Lane, okay. I went to school at Parkland, so not far.
Well, that was a little school. Preston Manor.
Oh, you went to Preston Manor?
Yeah.
I went to Bolton.
But yeah, but I say Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Yeah, just some thoughts.
That's it. It's just it made me remember some of the lecture teaching in London, corporate style. That essence, Yeah, no, it's good that you bring it in here. It's nice. It's like nuggets, nugget size. I think I might bring my teachers. I think they could benefit from this type of breakdown. Because otherwise they listen to the shlokas, they see the shlokas really nicely, but then when you start explaining it, it's, I think, they're teenagers. So do you have any material that's probably more relatable for teenagers?
We have online and also they can watch the videos, 20, 30 seconds long, and give them things to think about.
Okay, I'll see what I can find.
Sure. Nice to meet you. Should we go? You going to my room? We'll take Rick to your room. Can leave Madame there.